Thank you very much, Joe, for inviting me. And sort of being last on the schedule, I'm not sure if I'm going to be providing much additional insight, except I hope to provoke some additional thinking. Because as a small organization that started 3.5 years ago in Canada, and I was the first employee and started out of my basement, and now we're about 30, I think there's a unique perspective that Celgene has, and I'll share with you some interesting developments that you'll all get to witness on Saturday evening. But I would suggest to you that it will be a poster child for what I'm talking about today. So a very, very brilliant person once said to me, "Brilliance poorly communicated is lost." And I think that that's an example and illustrates sort of where we are as an industry, because too many of the innovations that are available to Canadians, their relative value, I think, is being lost and lost on the public. And then ultimately, I would suggest to you, and I'd be a bit of a contrarian with some of the earlier presentations, that I think government is doing a fabulous job. I think that Health Canada is doing a tremendous job of listing new agents. Their measures are not health of Canadians. It's not the numbers of new drugs that have been approved. It's not getting access to patients more quickly. It's actually safety and effectiveness. Their job is to make sure that whatever industry brings forth is safe and effective. So their issue is not a time-based issue. I would also suggest that the payers are doing a great job, because the payers aren't measured on access and the number of patients treated. They're measured on a budget. And their metric is sustainability. And I would suggest to you, and the core element of my talk today is that government is doing a heck of a lot better job than industry is in defining the value story. And I'll provide some examples why I think we need to, as an industry, decide whether or not we're going to coalesce to a common language and take some of the data that we see here and really start packaging it into a value story that gets communicated consistently and efficiently across every presentation that members of this audience, RxMD, Biotech Canada, can champion and feel proud about. I had a question, a series of questions that I had put up. Can we put up? So please select the most accurate statement from the following. At parties with families and friends, I find it best to stay away from discussions regarding the pharma industry. Most people I know think cost when they think of medicines. I'd be uncomfortable discussing our industry's value story with a perfect stranger. I believe I've done a good job in consistently communicating the benefits we bring to Canadians. That actually was to be reworded. I have not done a good job. Sometimes I think I'd like to switch careers and go sell beer. Or all of the above. So, and I think that it's good that number 3, everyone hasn't answered that one, but I think it does speak to a lot of the issues that we're all dealing with. And again, I think it's something that we need to coalesce on as an industry if we are to try to make gains on behalf of patients and frankly for each of ourselves in this room. So next slide. I'll highlight to you why I think we're doing a poor job as an industry and why I think we need to find more forums such as this, but probably with an expanded audience including patients and payers, because if you look at the 2010 CATA Symposia and you go through the symposia at length, and it's available online, you see that this being really the showcase for Canadian healthcare, health economics, cost reviews, that it is an extremely robust program that talks about value for money, the crucial role that health technology assessment is playing in creating a sustainable environment for Canadians. And that the recommendations in helping policymakers, planners, and healthcare professionals harness the benefits of technology, it doesn't necessarily include industry as a partner. And so I would agree with earlier comments that we have a long way to go in order to establish a partnership. There are, of note, several pharma speakers, but are we getting to a point where there's balance about what are great presentations of health economic value that have come forth for the industry and have been established as standards that others should model? A disturbing trend, and I would suggest it's something that is a counter to what's been happening in the orphan disease policy area, driven by some of the industry, are issues around orphan disease. We've seen earlier that Canada is one of the few jurisdictions in the world without an orphan disease policy for new drugs for these restricted areas. But now there's this discrete choice study that is being presented in an oral session by a group of physicians from McMaster, where, in fact, I'll read to you the end line, that the results confirm the importance of severity and treatment effectiveness and preferences for public funding. Though the first study of its kind, the results sent a cautionary message regarding the special treatment of orphan drugs in coverage decision-making. The respondents were found that they were not willing to pay more for rare diseases than they were for other diseases in broader patient populations. And so I would suggest that this is sort of the beginning of a counter to the issue of orphan disease, because as we look at it in more individualized health care, when we look at the impact of genomics, when we look at the entry of biologics, more individualized health care, I think there will continue to be greater and greater pressure on whether or not those therapies truly add value to the Canadian healthcare system. And if we don't do a better job, I think, of illustrating that, despite the high costs, we're going to find ourselves in a continued downward spiral. I told you this would be the upbeat part of the morning, and this is a recent payer response that Celgene received. We participate in the Joint Oncology Drug Review process, which uses CDR. The reviewer's notes were extensive, extremely well done, very, very thorough. They correctly identified that survival benefit was demonstrated. They clearly recognized that no other treatment alternatives exist, but their end conclusion was that due to uncertainties around budget impact, recommend to the payer to enter into negotiations with the manufacturer. I frankly feel and see this as our inability to more properly communicate the value of the drug, because at the end of the day, for all of us, I think we all know that if you default to cost, that's the lowest level of the pyramid, and frankly, that's where we operate in, and in 20 years, I haven't seen us move much beyond that. So I would suggest to you that the payer has defined excellence in defining the cost, the value, and the unsustainable story. This is something that we've seen consistently over the last three and a half years, and that the result of cost ultimately meaning that quality of life, impact on patients as they grow older, is not something that is valued necessarily by the payer. Now, I'd ask, over the last several elections, federal and provincial, when was cost or sustainable health care or the improvement in the lives of Canadians or Ontarians a major platform in the elections? And frankly, I don't recall it over the last period of time. And until that becomes a platform, I think we're going to continue to face increasing challenge. And to Vince's slides, I spend a lot of time with my U.S. colleagues identifying why Canada is a great place to come, but have been at the table for two circumstances, very specific circumstances, that if it hadn't been for serendipity, two important drugs would not have come. One, azacitidine, 5-azacitidine, currently now approved by DASA for into high-risk MDS and 20 to 30% blast AML. If Celgene had not acquired Pharmion, that drug would not be here today. They had no intention. They did not provide it via SAP. They were never coming. And today, there's probably 300 patients on a compassionate program provided by Celgene. And today, I regularly get emails thanking us for bringing that drug forth. The earlier slide was a slide that came back from the CCO JOTA process, identifying that unless we enter in pricing negotiations, perhaps that drug never comes available to Canadians unless Celgene continues to provide it. I can sustain that for a while, but eventually my corporate parent, due to equity worldwide, may lose a little bit of tolerance with the Canadian market, and that's something that I continue to fight with. The pricing story, won't spend much here, but we don't do a very good job of communicating it. I presented this at a public forum back in September and was almost tarred and feathered. I mean, we know the realities. It's interesting, the paradox of the Lopakis parallax really references the fact that the QALY, the $50,000 magical threshold, which was written about 12 years ago or 15 years ago now, continues to be referenced. It certainly hasn't been indexed by inflation, and if you were to speak to the author